Thank you so much. I especially appreciated the very timely reminder that I think there's this sense sometimes in these conversations that we're always adjusting to new, we're sort of moving forward and always continually adjusting to new standards or of professionalization or new material constrictions of the profession. But the reminder that sort of opening out, considering a broader professional world, is in our past, and it was very much how people thought of being scholars in the world and that their community, and actually why they became scholars in the first place. So I really appreciate that reminder, and specifically about rights and reason. So thank you for that. So I think we should open it up to questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for these were really wonderful. I was taking a ton of notes. And one thing that maybe that could bring these two together. So I heard anxieties about the job market as being one thread in the wonderfully exhaustive research you said, but it was one thread, whereas it was the whole dang thing for y'all, right? It was everything. And I'm wondering if this reflects the reality, or if you could talk a little bit more about where you see your colleagues here and nationwide in terms of their anxieties around the job market.
To be quite frank, our department right now is at 100% job placement, which is quite impressive. But to be honest, most of us aren't really, we have one foot in the university and one foot outside of the university. We all came in because we were interested in things outside of the university, and those are things that drove us into the university, because we're kind of disgruntled, disillusioned, things like that. So it's great that we have great job placement, but at the same time, we're also interested in really pursuing the question, and the question is really what's driving us, whether that happens within the university or outside of the university. But it is a great privilege to be able to say that we do have 100% job placement, which I do acknowledge. But there also is a different relationship that we have to the university because we are Black Studies as well.
And I'll also just say, situationally, Ella and I are both imminently graduating in like a month, so I feel like maybe that's all-consuming for us in our orientations in this moment as well. So that might be.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's absolutely part of it. I will say that although the best efforts of everybody in our department are being employed, we don't have 100% job placement. So I think it's a concern there too. But yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, we're also a relatively new department with only like 7 people that have graduated or something like that so far. So we'll see what happens in the future. Hopefully, we maintain that. So
I'll also say that I think in a large way, there's maybe a culture between graduate students in our department that I'm not sure if many of our students had potentially even thought of seeing themselves in graduate school, as Zuri's already mentioned. And so there's always, like you said, the foot in, foot out, this idea of like escape plan or exit plan, or if academia does not work out for me as a Black person who happens to be a Black Studies scholar, what are the alternatives? I feel like that's always in the background, that it might not work out anyway, which is also another question to consider in thinking about how graduate students relate to themselves as scholars. Yeah.
And I think that in this question, you all are the future of graduate studies in the humanities, and it's not in English. And this is one of the uncomfortable pieces, but in terms of how do we need to re-envision ourselves in relation to community, in relation to the larger world, and asking the most important questions. If I hear so much community engagement here, I think that it's not an accident that you all are at 100% placement, and that's the same with my students who also have a side eye, like, do I really want to be in academia all the time? And everyone's got a second job, right? Everyone's got a second job preparing for something else, and yet they are recreating what the university is. And I think that's really different than and I think that this is really hard and uncomfortable because you all are here, but ethically, the way that we create positions, faculty will say, it's my turn for my area. If your area is not actually yielding any jobs, should we be hiring them, but should we be bringing in graduate students in British literature if we're not going to hire them? So I think that this is an ethical issue, and it's going to mean that the sad sunsetting of some And I mean, it's hard, like, you got your mindset on something and it's not coming to fruition. It's not your fault. I think it was perhaps the department's fault in keeping the faculty member with the power to say, I deserve to have an advice this year.
I think that's a wonderful point. And I think ethics is something we've definitely brought up with our department, just around that question, what are we doing here exactly? What are we training our graduate students for? One of our wonderful speakers mentioned this fear of trying to do something transformative and then in a way having it hijacked and co-opted. And we've had conversations about the many ways that Black studies has been integrated or co-opted into more traditional disciplines. So now we're fighting to keep a discipline alive that really transformed the university in unprecedented ways, but still trying to find a space for our scholars to continue. And so it causes us to return to that question of ethics of what exactly is the point? Who are we describing when we talk about Black studies scholars? Do we want to fight for this institutionalization, or do we want to completely have this mass departure, this mass flight from the university where Black thoughts can exist somewhere else? This is all part of the conversation.
Thanks. I just wanted to maybe pick up on some of these threads and something that Zuri said towards the end, that this notion that Black studies is happening outside the academy and it's happening elsewhere. I mean, I think that's true of the humanities. I think we have to be real about that. I mean, the humanities are happening increasingly outside of the academy. It's happening on Substack. It's happening on Twitter. It's happening on Twitch, on YouTube. Some of the biggest names in fields, in legit academic fields, are finding platforms online. And I think we have to just be real about that. And that doesn't mean that universities have to somehow retool themselves into YouTube channels. But I think that we have to remain a place where thinking happens slowly and far from the kind of accounting that is, a short-term accounting in terms of views and likes and trend chasing. So we have to remain a place where uselessness is still possible. But I think we also have to be aware of those conversations that are happening, and some of them are very rich, deep conversations that are fascinating conversations, and they're big conversations. They're big tents with lots of people involved, and I think that the more universities can kind of up their game to participate in those kinds of conversations. In a way, the universities have to have that side eye. Like, we all have to be invested in being parts of those conversations if we're going to survive in this new media ecosystem. It was just a comment.
I'm not sure if anything will come out. I really appreciate all of the presentations were really informative. I have a selfish question, which has to do with these reports that you've written and what's going to happen with them is really important. I'm also in an African and African American Studies department that is pondering creating a PhD program. And you have amassed an incredible amount of information. So I'm wondering how we might access that information, but also if you might be interested in maybe coming and sharing with colleagues this question from the position of, I don't know how long the PhD program has been in place here. It's not super long, right?
Since 2009, right. I think their first class came in.
Right. So, I mean, to have that perspective, because there's some who don't want to do it at all, and some who think it's the only way forward. You can't have a top ranked, unless we have a PhD program. So I found this really helpful. And the comments here and the perspectives from being sort of at the end of this process is also really helpful. And I'm trying to sort of imagine ways in which these perspectives that are based also on deep research can move beyond this particular forum.
Just to respond, I'd definitely be interested in having a conversation with colleagues, and I think
if Yale can get me into their archives, because y'all close. No, but yeah, definitely, I'd love to. Yeah.
And to quickly say for us too, moving beyond this form, we didn't get to say this because we were a little bit short on time, but we use the result of our survey to figure out what sort of panels Brown graduate students need right now, or think they need or want to talk about professionalizing. So in a couple of weeks, we're having some people come in to speak about non-academic publishing. which is, I think, a relatively new thing. But they're both alums from Brown, so they're going to talk to us about doing that not full time, but incorporating that as part of their transition into academic life, which hopefully will be instructive.
Yeah, and in inviting them to do this, both of them wanted to say in full transparency, they were like, you've invited us to speak about writing and publishing, but we can't afford to do that full time, and we want to talk about the ways that we're navigating contingent work at the same time. And so we are developing a slate of panels that involve a lot of Brown alum who have gone on to different fields so that they can reflect on how they were oriented throughout the program and maybe how we might orient ourselves differently. But again, to come back to this question of success and what it means to be successful, I think everyone we've reached out to has kind of been like, we don't want to be like the success story of ALTAC, because that doesn't exist because of what ALTAC is as like a response and inbuilt part of this crisis. But yeah, and we will also be working with our department to share the data that we've collected and hopefully inform the ways that we integrate public-facing scholarship into the writing training that we do, how we think about professionalization earlier in the program. So yeah, we'll be collating this information and sharing it.
Yeah, we're hoping all the data we've collected can sort of echo back through the program in a way that it hasn't been able to do previously. So right now we start talking about professionalization in about year 3. Almost everyone we spoke to said they wanted it earlier. So we're going to try to do that.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say too, though, is something that we've both thinking about, like ethics, been thinking about, is the way that Black studies often has the relationship to the university. The relationship that the university has to Black studies is often extractive, both in the knowledge, but both in the very bodies of the people within Black studies, particularly the Black bodies within Black studies. And so I think that's something that going forward, like I just want to continue to flag and have on people's radars as we go forward, is that Black studies often is extracted from in these very particular ways. And we see that when we think about, Audre Lorde and Barbara Christian, who died very early because of the ways that they are extracted from their very bodies. So just wanted to flag that going forward as well.
I think I also wanted to support that, because really what we're seeing in national conferences, especially in thinking about the ways that Black studies contributes to the university, is you see this, of course, don't get us wrong, we're in Black studies, so we understand how important it is. At the same time, however, we see this positioning of Black studies over other types of programs that focus on ethnic studies. So you'll have conferences that are only on bell hooks and Audre Lorde, but I know that there should be conferences on like Chicanx studies and indigenous feminism studies, and there are other people to pull from, and we just don't see the same attention happening with what are the other perspectives that are contributing to like this vast, I guess, multiracial, multi-ethnic narrative, especially when it comes to the United States. And you see a constant returning to the work of Black women, which is, of course, or Black men, which is phenomenal and it's amazing. But there is this extraction where then the Black voice is the only voice that people want to hear from, in a way that places the burden on Black people to be the faces of an entire university or entire trends or entire discussions, which we think can be potentially and has been very harmful.
Guys, that was really beautifully rendered. I really appreciate the effort it takes to choreograph your duos. I have 2 questions. Question 1, would you prefer that faculty not admit students into academic areas that have not had large enough market possibilities? I'm going to give 2 examples. Should we no longer have graduate students in Assyriology or in Romanticism? Number 2, do you think if public-facing work should be considered a component of your identity as a scholar, that should be assessed as a part of tenure? Part B, the only proposal I've ever heard where that would be workable would require looking at citational impact and therefore a pretty profound social media presence for every scholar to produce it. So I'd just be interested in, how should public-facing work be accounted for in the system of academic knowledge, or should it be considered outside the space of instrumentalization, that it's considered a voluntary effort of the faculty, or is it incorporated? Second, what do you think about fields that don't seem to have a strong, would you like to see the faculty take the leadership and simply not admit students in those areas?
I can't answer the second part.
You're not
But
in tenure committees yet, so it's a little hard.
yeah. I think that as far as the requirement of being public facing, I think that's something that I personally wouldn't want, just because when we think about the attacks on anything that's remotely looks like it's radical race theory, it's like it's attacked pretty heavily, which would basically I'm just fearful of the public and of being public facing in any way, particularly to a larger audience that's not within Black studies, because again, these are very different types of conversations that we're having, and very different approaches to the work. So for me, I don't think that I would want there to be a requirement for having a public facing, and also Twitter's just a scary place. It's I've had like multiple accounts because it's scary. Like you have to get out of there sometimes. But yeah.
I think the two questions are very connected. No, I think the PhD training is important regardless of placement, and I think the challenge would be to have more public-facing scholarship or alternative avenues so that if you are not placed in a seriology, there's somewhere else for you to go, or you feel like your training was worth it because now you're educated in a certain area. These disciplines are incredibly important, regardless of whether someone feels that you're qualified for the professoriate or not. So I think, no, perhaps not having a public-facing requirement, but I think integrating that into doctoral education provides more avenues for people to be hired outside of the university. So they kind of work in tandem. People in our department have had films as part of their dissertation. I'm interested in maybe curating an exhibition as part of my dissertation. I think it provides different avenues for you to work and for you to feel like there is value, merit, and importance in your scholarship, regardless, as I've already said, in them. So I probably would never advocate for taking away disciplines that obviously have their own pathway to knowledge or exploration or just discovery of new ideas. I just think that they should be assessed differently, which then leads to needing more public-facing scholarship alternatives to what scholarship actually is other than a manuscript.
Yeah, I think part of it has to do with just the orientation of the program and what its trajectory seems like it is, especially when you're entering. And so if you are entering believing that it is training for this particular job, then that's different from entering believing that it is a skill set that is worthy in and of itself and has a manifold of different resonances in places. I mean, I have chosen not to go in the academic job market. I've chosen not to go in academia. I finished my dissertation and I'm going to pursue other paths. And so I have myself been reckoning with what does it mean that I've spent 6 years writing essentially a book that will not see the end result that I think I had imagined that it would when I joined the program. And I haven't landed anywhere with that yet, with resolving what that means for me, but I think it does mean thinking about getting a PhD in English and having that be something that can mean many different things and not just the tenure track placement. So that's a question that I'm personally still answering as I'm moving through this.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think I'm not sure I agree that there are any useless fields. I also think that any field that you join as a graduate student is far larger than you intend to be when you join it. So, like, a lot of what I do now is immigration law, even though I am like broadly a late 19th century, 20th century person in literature. So I think, when you're hired to do something, it doesn't necessarily mean that is what you will finish your graduate school wearing a hat, that it says. I also think that with the idea of temporality and like things changing as you go through the degree, I think that it would be very difficult to say that we should legislate, how much one's social media presence or how much one's like public facing self counts towards tenure or something like that, if that were to enter the rules, because we have no idea what that will look like in 5 or 10 years. I don't think anyone 5 or 10 years ago could have predicted what this market looks like. So I don't think there's a solid answer to that, but yeah, I think that fields are really capacious and they have to remain that way. Otherwise, what's the point?
And also just to say too, that I think social media creates a different kind of thinking and expression than different formats of writing that we've done. And so I think that there's like different metrics for virality, for impact on social media platforms that I think, that they create different metrics for success in ways that could potentially be distorting to reward specifically, if that makes sense. Just kind of the kind of thinking and the kind of conversations that gain water and gain traction on social media. So
sorry, one more drop in the bucket. If one of the things that tenure is supposed to do is promote academic freedom, right? You're supposed to be able to publish on things that seem important to you. That's for me fundamentally irreconcilable with the fact that social media platforms are allowed to ban you for saying things that they don't approve of. So there are academics who are currently banned from Twitter for saying things that Twitter doesn't think are in accordance with its terms of service.
So we're officially at time. Should we wrap up there? No.
There's one more,
Okay.
wasn't
All
there?
right.
Let's keep the ball rolling.
So I think, please, if you have any further questions, bring them up.